Sarah Johnson had saved 12 lives that week. She was a decorated ER nurse with 18 years of spotless service. But at 2:47 a.m., when police smashed through her door, none of that mattered. To them, she was just another black woman in the wrong neighborhood. The warrant had the wrong address. The suspect description didn't match, but they handcuffed her anyway. As she knelt on her own floor, trembling and humiliated, a man in white robes appeared in her doorway. The officers froze, because he knew every lie they had told themselves to justify this moment. The fluorescent lights of County Memorial Hospital buzzed overhead as Sarah Johnson moved through the emergency room at 1:15 a.m. Her blue scrubs bore the marks of another grueling shift. At 42 years old, she had seen nearly everything an ER could offer, but tonight had tested even her seasoned resolve. 12 lives saved in 1 week, a heart attack victim, 2 car crashes, 3 overdoses, a child with pneumonia. Each one walked out alive because of her skill and dedication. Dr. Rodriguez caught her at the staff exit. "Sarah, that motorcycle trauma from 11 o'clock, he's stable now. Surgery says your quick response on the blood loss saved his life." Sarah managed a tired smile. "That's what we do, doctor. That's why we're here." Rodriguez nodded with genuine respect. 18 years of excellence. "This hospital would collapse without nurses like you. Get some rest. You've earned it." The cold night air hit her face as she stepped into the parking lot. Her 2015 Honda Civic waited in space 47, where it had parked thousands of times over nearly 2 decades. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, paid off completely after years of diligent work. Sarah lived in Riverside Heights, a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes away. Her home on Maple Street had taken years of saving to afford. The modest 2-bedroom house was her pride, a symbol of everything she had worked for, a place that was entirely hers. The neighborhood was predominantly white and middle class, well-maintained lawns and American flags on porches. When Sarah first moved in 7 years ago, she'd noticed the surprised looks, the subtle questions about whether she was renting or buying, the too casual inquiries about her profession, as if they needed to verify she belonged there. But she'd held her head high.
Mrs.
Patterson next door had become a friend, bringing over baked goods. The Hendersons across the street always waved. Young Tommy Chen, 2 houses down, sometimes asked for help with science homework. Most neighbors had come to accept and appreciate her. Still, there were moments, small incidents that reminded Sarah some people would always see her as an outsider. The time someone called police claiming a suspicious person was breaking into a home, and Sarah had to explain she was entering her own house with her own key. The neighborhood watch meeting with suggestions about increased patrols in areas with recent demographic changes. The real estate agent who tried steering her toward different neighborhoods, using coded language about better fits. Sarah had learned to navigate these moments with grace, understanding she was often the first black professional many neighbors had known personally. She volunteered for neighborhood cleanups, contributed to charity drives, maintained her home meticulously. She refused to give anyone ammunition to suggest she didn't belong. As she drove through empty streets toward Riverside Heights, her mind shifted toward home's comfort. She imagined the hot shower, washing away hospital smells and exhaustion, her bed with its soft sheets weighted like a promise of peace. Streetlights cast amber pools along Maple Street as Sarah pulled into her driveway at 1:43 a.m. Everything looked exactly as it should. Quiet houses with darkened windows. Her home, number 2481, sat peaceful and welcoming, the exterior light casting warmth over her small porch. Sarah gathered her purse and lunch bag. Her body moved on autopilot. Key and lock, door opening with its familiar slight squeak, security system beeping for its code. Lights switched on. Home. Safe, her sis. She filled a glass with water, drinking deeply. Her throat was dry from hours of wearing a mask. The simple act of drinking cool water in her own kitchen felt luxurious. She noticed dishes in the sink from yesterday's hurried breakfast and made a mental note to handle them tomorrow. The hot shower was wonderful. Sarah stood under the spray, letting heat work into sore muscles. She used her favorite lavender body wash, a small luxury she allowed herself. Steam filled the bathroom as stress and tension swirled down the drain. By 2:30 a.m., Sarah was finally in bed. She'd set her alarm for 10 a.m., giving herself 7 solid hours before her day off. Maybe some laundry, perhaps grocery shopping, mostly just rest. She checked her phone and saw a text from her younger sister Michelle. "Proud of you, sis, you're out there literally saving the world. Love you." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Love you too." Finally home, about to crash. Talk tomorrow. She plugged her phone into the charger, adjusted her pillow and let her eyes close. The familiar sounds of her house settling were comforting. The gentle refrigerator hum, the barely audible clock tick, the distant sound of a passing car. Peace. Finally peace. Sarah felt consciousness slipping away, that pleasant drowsy feeling of a body finally allowed rest. Her breathing deepened. Her muscles relaxed. Sleep reached for her with gentle hands, and then at exactly 2:47 a.m., her entire world exploded. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, even in emergency rooms. Wood splintering and breaking, metal hinges ripped from moorings, her front door literally being destroyed. The crash was so sudden, so violent that her brain couldn't process what was happening. Police. Search warrant. The words weren't spoken, they were bellowed with aggression that turned them into weapons. Get on the ground now. Sarah's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She jerked upright, heart instantly pounding. Her bedroom door, always left slightly open, was suddenly thrown with such force it slammed against the wall. Blinding white light flooded her room. Flashlight beams so bright they were disorienting. Heavy footsteps thundered into her home. Multiple boots on hardwood floors, more shouting, overlapping commands that contradicted each other. Show me your hands. Get down. Don't move. Sarah's hands instinctively went up, her body responding even as her mind struggled to make sense of the nightmare invading her sanctuary. That's not enough, Sarah said. You violated my rights. You destroyed my property. You terrorized me in my own home. A home I worked 18 years to afford. A home where I should have been safe. She saw something flicker across Riley's face, something that might have been guilt or irritation at being challenged. We were executing a valid warrant, he said, tone becoming formal and distant. The address error is unfortunate, but we followed proper procedure for a raid on what we believe to be the correct location. Proper procedure, Sarah repeated, words tasting bitter. Is it proper procedure to verify an address before you break down someone's door? Or does that rule not apply in neighborhoods where you don't expect to find black homeowners? That's enough. The third officer, the white one with graying temples whose name tag read Patterson, spoke for the first time, voice hard, authoritative. We've apologized for the address mix-up. We'll ensure repairs are made, but I suggest you watch your tone and your accusations, ma'am. Sarah felt anger burning through shock and fear. My tone. You break into my home at 3 in the morning. You put me in handcuffs. You violate every sense of safety I've ever had, and you're concerned about my tone. She stood slowly, legs shaking but holding her weight. Even in bare feet and nightgown, she stood as tall as she could, meeting Patterson's eyes directly. I'm an ER nurse at County Memorial Hospital. I spent tonight saving lives. I came home exhausted and fell asleep in my own bed in my own house that I pay a mortgage on. And you treated me like a criminal because of an address mistake you should have caught before you ever touched my door. Now I want answers. Who are you looking for at 2418? What's this warrant for? And why did none of you double-check the address when you found a woman alone? Clearly not whoever you're seeking. The officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Riley finally spoke. Ma'am, the details of the investigation are confidential. We can't share information about ongoing cases. You just invaded my home as part of your ongoing case. Sarah shot back. I think I have a right to know why my door was broken and my life turned upside down. Officer Chen raised his hand slightly, a gesture meant to be calming. Ma'am, Sarah, we understand this has been traumatic. Truly, but there are protocols we have to follow regarding information disclosure. What I can tell you is we'll make a full report about the address error. Your complaints will be documented. The department will be in contact regarding repairs. When? Sarah demanded. When will they contact me? When will my door be fixed? Am I supposed to just sleep here tonight with a broken door and no security? What if the actual criminals you're looking for see what happened and think my home's an easy target now? The officers exchanged more glances, more uncomfortable shifting. Patterson finally responded. We'll have a unit patrol this street more frequently tonight, and you can file a claim with the department tomorrow. Today actually. Later this morning for emergency repairs. Sarah laughed without humor. So I'm supposed to comfort myself with more police presence after police just terrorized me. That's your solution, ma'am? Riley started, and Sarah heard impatience creeping into his voice. We've explained the situation. We've apologized. We've offered solutions. I'm not sure what else you expect from us. What I expect, Sarah said, voice shaking with emotion, is for you to see me as a human being. What I expect is for you to understand you didn't just make a little address mistake. You traumatized me. You violated my home. You treated me like I was guilty of something when my only crime was living in a neighborhood where you didn't expect to find someone who looks like me. That's not fair, Riley said, defensiveness fully present. This had nothing to do with race. This was a simple address error. Anyone could have been at this address. We would have executed the warrant the same way regardless of who answered the door. Would you? Sarah challenged. Would you really have broken down the door without double-checking if you'd expected to find a white family here? Or did you break it down so fast because you saw my name on the mailbox, maybe noticed my car, and made assumptions about what kind of person lives at 2481 instead of 2418? The accusation hung between them. Sarah saw Riley's jaw tighten, saw his hands clench. Patterson looked like he wanted to shut down this conversation. Chen looked away, not meeting anyone's eyes. And then in that moment of terrible tension, something changed in the room. The air seemed to shift, growing somehow lighter and heavier at the same time. The harsh overhead light seemed to soften without actually dimming, and standing in the doorway, in a space that had been empty just seconds before, was a man. He wore simple clothes, a plain white shirt and worn jeans, but there was something about his presence that made everyone in the room freeze. He wasn't tall or physically imposing. He didn't announce himself or make any dramatic entrance. He was simply there, as if he had always been there, as if the room had been incomplete without him. His face was kind, deeply kind, with dark eyes that seemed to contain depths of understanding and compassion. His skin was brown, weathered like someone who'd spent time in the sun. His hair was dark and fell past his shoulders. There was no supernatural glow, no ethereal light, nothing that would seem out of place in a photograph. Yet his presence was so profound that all four people in that room, Sarah and the three officers, found themselves unable to look away. Officer Riley's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "How did you get in here?" His voice was sharp, but there was uncertainty underneath. "The front door is," he trailed off, realizing what he was about to say. "The front door you broke is still broken." The man in the doorway smiled gently, sadly. "I've always been here," he said. And his voice was quiet, but it seemed to fill the entire room, seemed to resonate in a way that made it impossible to ignore. "The question isn't how I got in. The question is whether any of you are willing to see what's really happening in this moment."
Officer Patterson stepped forward, his hand also moving toward his holster. "Sir, you need to identify yourself immediately. This is an active police scene. How did you enter this residence?" The man's eyes moved from Patterson to Riley to Chen, and finally rested on Sarah, still trembling in her nightgown, her face streaked with tears. When he looked at her, something in Sarah's chest loosened, just slightly. There was no judgment in those eyes, no pity that would have felt condescending, just pure understanding and compassion. "My name," the man said, turning his attention back to the officers, "is not as important as what I'm about to tell you. But if you need something to call me, you can call me a friend. A friend to Sarah and perhaps, if you allow it, a friend to you as well. This is not a game," Riley said, his voice growing harder. "You need to leave this residence immediately, or you'll be arrested for interference with a police investigation." "Investigation?" The man's voice remained gentle, but there was an edge to it now, something that made all three officers pause. "You broke into the wrong home. You terrorized an innocent woman. You handcuffed a nurse who spent her evening saving lives. What exactly are you investigating here?" "Officer Riley, your own failures, your own biases." "How do you know my name?" Riley's face had gone pale. His name tag was visible, but something about the way this stranger said his name felt different, more personal, as if he knew more than just what was printed on a piece of plastic. The man took a step into the room, and despite having no weapon, despite making no threatening moves, all three officers instinctively took a step back. "I know all of your names," he said quietly. "Marcus Riley, David Patterson, James Chen. I know your names, and I know your hearts. I know the choices you've made, the assumptions you've carried, the justifications you've told yourselves." He turned to Officer Chen and his voice softened slightly. "James, you were the one who felt the most discomfort tonight. You're the one who offered to stay and secure Sarah's door. That speaks to something good in you, something that recognizes this was wrong, but you still participated. You still followed orders without question. You still saw Sarah's skin color before you saw her humanity." Chen's face flushed. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. His eyes dropped to the floor, The man turned to Patterson. David, you're angry right now. Angry at this situation. Angry at being questioned. Angry at Sarah for not simply accepting your apology and making this easier for you. You've been on the force for 23 years. You've executed 68 search warrants. This is the 7th time you've raided the wrong address. But it's the first time the person you've terrorized hasn't backed down, hasn't made it easy for you to walk away feeling like you did nothing wrong. Patterson's jaw clenched. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about police work, about the split-second decisions we have to make, about the dangers we face every day. I know about danger, the man said, and there was something ancient and sorrowful in his voice. I know about being judged before being known. I know about being condemned without trial. I know about violence carried out by people who believed they were doing the right thing. I know, David. I know far better than you might think. He turned finally to Riley, the youngest of the 3 officers, and his expression became even more intense. Marcus, you're 38 years old. You've been a police officer for 12 years. Tonight isn't the first time you've made assumptions based on someone's race. It's just the first time you've been confronted with the consequences in such a direct way. Riley's hands were shaking now. I didn't. He stammered, then stopped. His face had gone from pale to red. You have no right to come in here and accuse us of racism. We made an address mistake. That's all. It could have happened to anyone. Could it? The man's voice remained gentle, but his words cut like a blade. Tell me, Marcus, when you saw the address 2418 on the warrant, did you verify it against the number on this house? Did you check the mailbox at the end of the driveway that clearly says 2481? Or did you see a black woman's name on that mailbox, Sarah Johnson, and did something in your mind say this could be the place, this could be right, because you've been trained to see black faces as more likely to be criminal faces? That's not true, Riley said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's not. We just made a mistake. The man walked slowly toward Riley, and the officer seemed frozen, unable to move away. You made a mistake, yes, but the mistake wasn't just about numbers. The mistake was in your heart, in your assumptions, in the prejudices you don't even realize you carry. When was the last time you raided a home in the wealthy white neighborhood on the north side of town? When was the last time you broke down a door without triple-checking the address when you knew the occupant would be white and affluent? Riley didn't answer. He couldn't answer, because they both knew the truth. The man turned back to Sarah, who had been watching this entire exchange with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been hope. Sarah, he said gently, you've spent 18 years healing people. You've poured your life into service, into making your community better, into being exactly the kind of citizen everyone claims to want. And yet tonight, all of that meant nothing. Tonight you were reduced to a stereotype, to an assumption, to a color. Sarah's tears started flowing again, but these were different. These weren't tears of fear or humiliation. These were tears of being seen, of being understood, of having someone finally acknowledge the depth of what had been done to her. I did everything right, she whispered. I worked hard. I bought a home. I help people. I follow every rule. And it didn't matter. None of it mattered. It matters, the man said firmly. It matters to every patient whose life you've saved. It matters to every family you've comforted. It matters to the community you serve. And it matters to me. But you're right that it didn't matter to these officers tonight, because they didn't see you. They saw a category. They saw an assumption. They saw a justification for their actions. He turned back to the officers, and now his voice carried a weight that made the room feel heavy. Let me tell you what I see when I look at this moment. I see 3 men who took an oath to protect and serve. I see 3 men who have families who love them, who have their own struggles and pain. I see David, whose father died when he was 16. Leaving him angry at a world that felt unfair. I see James, whose family immigrated here with nothing, who worked his way through every obstacle, who should understand better than most what it means to be judged by your appearance. I see Marcus, whose sister was assaulted 10 years ago, whose fear and anger about that has colored every interaction he's had with people who look like her attacker. All 3 officers looked stunned. These were details no stranger should know, private pain they'd never shared publicly. I see your humanity. The man continued. I see your wounds. I see the ways life has hurt you and shaped you, but I also see the ways you've allowed those wounds to become weapons. I see how you've let your pain justify causing pain to others. I see how you've convinced yourselves that your fear makes your prejudice acceptable. That's not fair, Patterson protested, but his voice was weaker now. You're twisting this into something it's not. Am I? The man's eyes blazed with intensity now. Then explain to me, David, why Sarah's door was broken down without verification, but last month when you had a warrant for 415 Oak Street you called for backup and verified the address 3 times before approaching because you knew the residents were white and wealthy and well-connected. Explain to me why the benefit of the doubt is always extended to white faces but denied to black ones. We're not racist, Riley said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. We're just doing our jobs. Your job, the man said, his voice soft but penetrating, is to protect and serve all people equally. Your job is to see every person as a human being deserving of dignity and respect. Your job is to be guardians, not warriors. But you've forgotten that. You've let statistics and stereotypes and fear replace compassion and wisdom. He moved to stand beside Sarah, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She flinched slightly at first, then relaxed. There was something about his touch that felt safe, protective. This woman, he said, has given more to your community in 1 week than most people give in a lifetime. 12 lives saved. 12 families who still have their loved ones because Sarah showed up, worked hard, used her skills with precision and care. And how did you repay that service? With violence, with humiliation, with the message that no matter what she does, no matter how good she is, her skin color will always make her suspicious in your eyes. The officers stood in uncomfortable silence. Chen looked like he might be sick. Patterson's jaw was still clenched, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Riley's hands had stopped shaking, but he looked lost, like the foundation of something he'd believed about himself had cracked. I want to tell you a story, the man said, his voice shifting to something that felt timeless, ancient. 2,000 years ago, there was a man who was arrested without cause. The authorities had decided he was dangerous, even though he'd spent his life healing people, teaching love and compassion, serving the poor and marginalized. They didn't verify their information. They didn't give him the benefit of the doubt. They saw what they expected to see, a threat that needed to be eliminated. He paused, and something in the room shifted. The 3 officers were listening now, really listening, in a way they hadn't been before. They put him in chains. The man continued. They beat him. They humiliated him. They spat on him. They called him a criminal. And when people protested, when people said this man has done nothing wrong, the authorities said they were just following orders, just doing their jobs, just keeping the peace. They convinced themselves that their violence was justified because the man didn't fit what they thought he should be. Sarah was watching the man's face as he spoke, and she saw something there, a deep pain, a personal understanding of exactly what he was describing. This wasn't just a story to him, this was something he knew intimately. That man, the stranger continued, died because of their assumptions. He died because people in power chose their prejudices over truth, their fear over love, their need to maintain control over their duty to seek justice. And do you know what his last words were? His last words were forgiveness. Even as they killed him, he forgave them, because he understood they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't see him as human. They saw him as a category, a threat, a problem to be solved. The room was absolutely silent now. The man turned back to the officers, and tears were streaming down his face, but his voice remained steady. You didn't kill Sarah tonight, but you killed something. You killed her sense of safety. You killed her belief that doing everything right would protect her. You killed the dream she had that in her own home, in the place she worked so hard to afford, she would finally be seen as equal. I'm not. Riley started, then stopped. His voice broke. I'm not a bad person. No, the man said gently. You're not. None of you are bad people, but good people do bad things when they don't examine their own hearts, when they don't question their own assumptions, when they let fear and prejudice guide their actions instead of love and truth. He walked to Riley and looked directly into his eyes. Marcus, your sister's attacker was a black man, and ever since that night, some part of you has seen every black face as potentially dangerous. You don't even realize you do it. But when you saw Sarah's name on that warrant, when you saw this address in this neighborhood, something in your subconscious said yes, this could be right, because you've associated black people with crime for so long that it feels like truth instead of prejudice.
Riley's face crumpled. He sank down onto the edge of Sarah's bed, his head in his hands. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to keep people safe. I wanted to make sure what happened to my sister never happens to anyone else. I know, the man said, his voice full of compassion, and that desire to protect is good. But you've let your trauma turn into a weapon against innocent people. You've let one evil person make you suspicious of millions of people who've done nothing wrong. That's not justice, Marcus. That's not protection. That's just more pain spreading through the world. He turned to Patterson. David, you lost your father young. You had to become the man of the house at 16. You learned to be hard, to be tough, to never show weakness, and you brought that hardness into your work. But hardness without compassion isn't strength, it's just cruelty wearing a uniform. Patterson's jaw unclenched slightly. His eyes were shining now. He started, then paused. I've never thought of it that way. And James the man turned to Chen. You know what it's like to be the other, to be seen as foreign even though this is your home. Your parents worked 3 jobs each to give you opportunities. You've succeeded beyond what anyone expected. But somewhere along the way, you decided the best way to belong was to align yourself with power, to never question authority, to be the good minority who doesn't make waves. And tonight, that silence made you complicit in injustice. Chen's voice was barely a whisper. What should I have done? You should have checked the address, the man said simply. You should have questioned when things didn't add up. You should have spoken up when you saw Sarah in that nightgown, clearly not matching the description of whoever you were looking for. You should have chosen courage over comfort. The man walked back to Sarah and knelt beside where she sat on the floor. He took her hands gently in his. Sarah, he said softly, you are seen, you are valued. You are loved exactly as you are. What happened here tonight was wrong. It was unjust. It was a violation. And nothing I say or do can undo that trauma. But I want you to know that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. Your dignity isn't diminished by their prejudice. Who are you? Sarah whispered, looking into his eyes. How do you know all of this? How can you see so clearly into all of our hearts? The man smiled, and it was both joyful and sorrowful at the same time. I'm someone who knows what it's like to be misjudged. I'm someone who understands suffering. I'm someone who believes that love is stronger than hate, that truth is stronger than lies, that light can overcome even the deepest darkness. And I'm someone who has been waiting for this moment, waiting for hearts to be ready to hear what they need to hear. He stood and addressed all 4 of them. What happens next is up to all of you. This moment can be just another statistic, another wrong address raid that gets swept under the rug with a quick apology and a repair bill, or this moment can be a turning point. This can be the moment when 3 officers choose to really examine their hearts, when they choose to confront their own biases, when they choose to be better. And this can be the moment when Sarah chooses whether to let this violation define her or whether to let it fuel her to demand better, not just for herself but for everyone who looks like her. The silence that followed was profound. Each person in that room was grappling with something deep and uncomfortable, something that couldn't be easily dismissed or rationalized away. Finally, Officer Riley stood. His face was wet with tears he hadn't bothered to wipe away. He walked slowly to Sarah and knelt in front of her just as the stranger had done. Sarah, he said, his voice shaking. I am so deeply sorry, not just for the address mistake. I'm sorry for not seeing you. I'm sorry for the assumptions I made. I'm sorry for carrying prejudices I didn't even realize I had. I'm sorry for contributing to a system that made you feel unsafe in your own home. Sarah looked at him, and 1,000 emotions played across her face. Anger, pain, exhaustion, but also something else, something that might have been the beginning of grace. I appreciate your apology, she said slowly, but apologizing to me isn't enough. If you really want to make this right, you need to look at every case you've worked, every stop you've made, every decision you've made, and ask yourself how many times prejudice influenced your actions. You need to speak up when you see other officers doing what you did tonight. You need to be part of changing a system that makes this kind of violation possible. Riley nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. I will. I promise you. I will. Patterson stepped forward, and his face was different now, softer, more open. Sarah, I've been doing this job for over 2 decades, and I've told myself that I treat everyone fairly, that I don't see color, that I'm just enforcing the law. But the truth is, not seeing color meant not seeing the different realities people face, not seeing how my actions impact people differently based on who they are. I was wrong. We were wrong. And I'm sorry. Chen was the last to approach. He bowed slightly, a gesture from his cultural background that conveyed deep respect and remorse. Sarah, I knew something was wrong tonight. I felt it. But I stayed silent, because speaking up felt risky, felt like it might cost me. I chose my comfort over your safety. That was cowardly. I am deeply ashamed. And I am profoundly sorry. Sarah looked at each of them. These 3 men who had violated her home and her sense of security. She looked at their faces, now open and vulnerable in ways they probably rarely allowed themselves to be. She looked at the stranger, still standing quietly nearby, and she saw encouragement in his eyes. I don't know if I can forgive you right now, she said honestly. What you did to me, it broke something. And it's going to take time to heal, if it ever fully heals, but I hear your apologies. I see that you're starting to understand, and I truly hope, that you mean what you're saying. Because if you do, if you really change, then maybe other people won't have to go through what I went through tonight. The stranger placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder again, and when he spoke, his voice filled the room with something that felt like hope. This is how healing begins. Not with erasure, not with forgetting, not with quick fixes, but with truth-telling. With acknowledging harm, with the hard work of examining hearts and changing systems. This is just the beginning, but it's a start. He looked at each person in turn. Sarah, you have every right to file complaints, to demand accountability, to make noise about what happened here. Don't let anyone silence your voice. Your story matters. Marcus, David, James, you have work to do. Hard work, painful work, work that will require you to face uncomfortable truths about yourselves and about the systems you serve. But that work is necessary. That work is what real justice looks like. Riley wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. Sir, whoever you are, thank you. Thank you for. He paused, searching for words. Thank you for holding up a mirror we needed to see. Thank you for not letting us walk away from this without understanding what we really did. The stranger smiled. I didn't do anything except remind you of truths you already knew in your hearts. The question now is what you'll do with those truths. He began walking toward the bedroom door, and something about his movement made it clear he was leaving. Sarah stood quickly. Wait, she called out. You never told me who you really are. How you knew all of those things. Why you came here tonight. The man paused in the doorway and turned back. His face was illuminated by the soft bedroom light, and for just a moment Sarah could have sworn she saw something else in his features, something ancient and eternal, and infinitely compassionate. I came because I'm always present where injustice happens, he said quietly. I came because I care about the broken-hearted. I came because I believe in redemption and transformation. I came because love is stronger than hate, and truth is stronger than lies, and I came because you, Sarah, are precious and worthy, and you needed to hear that tonight. But who are you? Sarah asked again, taking a step toward him. The stranger's smile was radiant. I think you already know, he said softly. You've known since the moment you saw me standing in your doorway, and then in a way that none of them could quite explain later. He was gone. Not dramatically, not with any flash or sound. He was simply no longer there, as if he had stepped from one reality into another. The 4 people left in Sarah's bedroom stood in stunned silence. Sarah touched her shoulder where his hand had rested, and she felt warmth there, a comfort that seemed to emanate from deep within. Officer Chen broke the silence first. Did that really just happen? His voice was filled with wonder and confusion. Riley shook his head slowly. I don't know what just happened, but I know I'm not the same person I was an hour ago. Patterson nodded in agreement. Neither am I. Sarah walked to her bedroom window and looked out at the quiet street, at the peaceful neighborhood she had worked so hard to be part of. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first hints of dawn touching the horizon. A new day was coming. She turned back to the officers. My door still needs to be fixed, she said, and her voice was steady now, strong. And I'm still filing a formal complaint. And I'm still going to make sure this story is heard, that people know what happened here, but I'm also going to hold you to your promises. I'm going to watch to see if you really change, if you really do the work you said you would do. All 3 officers nodded. We will, Riley said. I promise you we will. The sun rose over Riverside Heights that morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah stood in her doorway watching as a city repair crew worked to install a temporary door. The 3 officers had stayed until dawn, not because they had to, but because something fundamental had shifted in all of them. Officer Chen had called for the emergency repair crew himself, staying on the phone until he got someone to commit to coming immediately. Officer Patterson had documented everything in his report with a level of honesty that would likely cost him, admitting their failure to verify the address, their assumptions, their mistakes. And Officer Riley had sat at Sarah's kitchen table, writing out every detail of what had happened, creating a record that Sarah could use however she chose. As the repair crew worked, Mrs. Patterson from next door appeared on her porch, her face etched with concern. "Sarah, what happened?" "I heard noise in the middle of the night." Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had to decide. She could minimize it, brush it off, protect her privacy, or she could tell the truth, let her neighbors know what had happened, risk the discomfort and awkwardness that might follow. The memory of the stranger's words echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone silence your voice. Your story matters. My home was raided by police at 2:47 this morning," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the quiet morning street. "They had the wrong address. They broke down my door, handcuffed me in my nightgown and terrorized me in my own home. Because they made assumptions, because I'm a black woman in a neighborhood where they didn't expect to find me." Mrs. Patterson's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God, Sarah, that's horrible. I'm so sorry." Other neighbors were emerging now, drawn by the repair truck and the commotion. The Hendersons, young Tommy Chen's parents, the Rodriguezes from 3 houses down. They gathered on the sidewalk, listening as Sarah told her story again, not holding back, not softening the truth. "I've lived here for 7 years," Sarah continued. "I've been a good neighbor. I've contributed to this community. I've followed every rule, and last night none of that mattered. Last night I learned that no matter how hard I work, no matter how good I am, some people will always see my skin color before they see my humanity." There was uncomfortable silence. Some neighbors looked ashamed, others looked angry on her behalf. Tommy Chen's mother spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of shared experience. "We know what that's like. Not exactly the same, but we know. We've had people assume my husband doesn't belong here, assume he's the gardener when he's working in our own yard." The Rodriguezes nodded. "We've had similar experiences. People speaking slowly to us like we don't understand English, even though we were born here." Sarah felt something loosening in her chest. She wasn't alone in this. She'd never been alone, though the isolation of last night had made it feel that way. Officer Riley, who had been standing quietly near his patrol car, stepped forward. His eyes were still red from earlier tears. "I'm one of the officers who raided Sarah's home last night," he said, and several neighbors turned to look at him with expressions ranging from anger to curiosity. "I want you all to know that what happened was inexcusable. We made assumptions. We failed to verify basic information. We violated Sarah's rights and her dignity. And I'm committing right here in front of all of you to do better, to be better." "What are you going to do about it?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice hard. "Saying sorry isn't enough." "You're right," Riley said. "It's not enough. I'm requesting a transfer to community policing. I'm signing up for every training on implicit bias, on de-escalation, on community relations that I can find. I'm going to speak at the next city council meeting about the need for better protocols on warrant execution. And I'm going to make sure that every officer in my department hears Sarah's story, so maybe, just maybe, this never happens to anyone else." Patterson stepped forward as well. "I'm retiring," he said. And there was both sadness and relief in his voice. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I thought I was doing it right. But tonight showed me that I've been carrying blindness I didn't even know I had. I can't keep doing this work until I've done the internal work first. So I'm retiring, and I'm going to spend the next years of my life actually listening to communities I claim to serve, actually learning about the harm I may have caused, actually trying to make amends." Chen spoke last. "I'm the one who should have spoken up and didn't. I stayed silent when I knew something was wrong, because speaking up felt risky. I'm not going to be silent anymore. I'm joining the Asian American Pacific Islander Community Coalition, and I'm going to work on building bridges between communities of color and law enforcement. I'm going to use my position to advocate for change from inside the system." Sarah listened to each of them, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever fully, but something like hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from this nightmare. Hope that their promises weren't empty words but genuine commitments to change. The morning progressed, the temporary door was installed. Sarah's sister Michelle arrived, after Sarah called her, and she wrapped Sarah in a fierce hug, crying with her, angry for her protective of her. More neighbors came by throughout the day, bringing food, offering support, asking what they could do to help. Officer Riley kept his word about staying in touch. He called that afternoon to let Sarah know he'd filed a formal internal complaint about the raid, naming himself and his colleagues in it. He'd requested an investigation by an independent oversight board. He'd contacted a civil rights attorney on Sarah's behalf, giving her the name and number of someone who specialized in police misconduct cases. "I don't expect you to thank me for doing what I should have done from the start," Riley said on that phone call, "but I want you to know I'm serious about this. About changing. About making sure this leads to real accountability." Sarah sat in her living room that afternoon, surrounded by flowers and food from neighbors, her sister beside her, and she thought about the stranger who had appeared in her bedroom. She still didn't fully understand who he was or how he'd known the things he knew, but his impact was undeniable. Michelle had listened to the whole story, and now she looked at Sarah with wonder. "A man just appeared in your room, in the middle of all that chaos, and he knew everyone's deepest secrets and pain." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know how it sounds, but Michelle, it happened. He was there, he said things no stranger could know. He looked at me with such compassion, such understanding, and after he left everything changed. The officers changed. I changed. Something broke open in all of us." Michelle was quiet for a moment. "Do you think," she started, then paused, "do you think it was actually him? Jesus?" Sarah remembered the stranger's face, the way his eyes held both infinite sadness and infinite love, the way his presence had felt simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary, the way he'd talked about being arrested without cause, beaten, condemned, killed by people who didn't see his humanity. "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "But I know that whoever he was, whatever he was exactly what all of us needed in that moment." He held up a mirror to those officers that they couldn't look away from, and he reminded me of my worth when I felt completely violated and diminished. The days that followed were not easy. Sarah had nightmares about the door crashing open, about flashlights and shouting. She jumped at sudden noises. She found herself hypervigilant in her own home, unable to fully relax. She started therapy, working through the trauma with a counselor who specialized in police violence. But she also found her voice growing stronger. She told her story at a city council meeting, standing at the podium with her voice steady despite her shaking hands. She told it again at a community forum on police reform. She told it to journalists who wanted to cover the story of the wrong address raid and the mysterious stranger who had appeared. The story spread beyond Riverside Heights. Local news picked it up first, then regional, then national. People were moved by the account of the decorated nurse whose home had been violated, by the officers who had committed to real change, by the mysterious man who had catalyzed a moment of genuine transformation. Some people were skeptical. They said Sarah was making up the part about the stranger to get attention. They said the officers were just covering themselves legally. They said nothing would really change, that this was just more empty promises. But others saw hope in the story. They saw possibility. They saw evidence that hearts could change, that systems could be challenged, that truth-telling could lead to real accountability. Officer Riley kept every promise he'd made. He transferred to community policing and started walking beats in neighborhoods he'd previously only driven through. He attended community meetings and actually listened. He spoke at the police academy about implicit bias, using his own failures as teaching examples. And he stayed in touch with Sarah, not as an officer to a victim, but as one human being to another, checking in, asking how she was doing, sharing his own journey of unlearning prejudice. Patterson did retire, and he spent his retirement volunteering with organizations that worked on criminal justice reform. He attended restorative justice circles where he listened to people who'd been harmed by police, including several people he'd arrested over the years. He wrote letters of apology. He donated money to bail funds and legal defense funds. He became an unlikely advocate for defunding aggressive policing tactics and reinvesting in communities. Chen joined the API Community Coalition as promised, and he also became a vocal advocate within the police department for better training and accountability. He pushed for body cameras to be mandatory and always on. He advocated for independent oversight boards with real power. He used his position as a minority officer to challenge the culture of silence that protected bad policing. 6 months after that terrible night, Sarah stood in front of a crowd at a rally for police accountability. The temporary door on her home had long since been replaced with a permanent one, stronger than the original. But the work of healing was ongoing, as was the work of demanding justice. She looked out at the crowd, at the signs demanding change, at the faces of so many people who'd experienced their own violations, their own moments of being seen as less than human. And she thought about the stranger's words, "Your story matters, don't let anyone silence your voice." "My name is Sarah Johnson," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I'm a nurse. I've dedicated my life to healing people, to serving my community, to doing everything right. And 6 months ago, police broke down my door in the middle of the night because they had the wrong address. They handcuffed me in my nightgown. They made me kneel on my own floor in my own home. They violated my sense of safety in a way I'm still recovering from." The crowd was absolutely silent, listening, but something happened that night that changed everything. Sarah continued. "Someone appeared in my home, someone who saw past all our defenses and our justifications and our fears, and showed us the truth. The truth about prejudice and assumption, the truth about how systems of power can make good people do terrible things. The truth about how healing can only begin when we're willing to really see each other." She paused, remembering the stranger's face, his compassionate eyes, his gentle but firm words. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand who that person was," Sarah said. "Some people think I made him up. Some people think he was just a hallucination born from trauma, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know that his presence broke something open in all of us that needed to break. And here's what I learned that night. Justice isn't just about punishing people who do wrong. Justice is about transformation. It's about truth-telling. It's about people being willing to examine their own hearts and change their own behavior. It's about building systems that see everyone's humanity, that protect everyone's dignity." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah wasn't finished.
The officers who raided my home that night could have just apologized and moved on, she continued. They could have done the minimum required and protected themselves. But they didn't. They chose something harder. They chose to really look at themselves, to really change, and that gives me hope. Hope that change is possible. Hope that people can grow. Hope that we can build something better. She looked around at the crowd, at the signs demanding change, at the faces full of hope and anger and determination. "But we can't just hope," Sarah said, her voice rising with passion. "We have to demand. We have to organize. We have to vote. We have to show up at city council meetings and community forums. We have to tell our stories, over and over, until people can't ignore them anymore. We have to be loud and persistent and uncompromising in our demand for justice." The applause was thunderous now. Sarah felt the energy of the crowd, the power of people coming together to demand better, to refuse to accept the status quo. As she stepped away from the microphone, Sarah felt a presence beside her. She turned, half expecting to see the stranger again, but it was just another activist, offering her a bottle of water and a smile. But in that moment, Sarah felt something she recognized from that night 6 months ago, that sense of not being alone, that sense of being part of something larger than herself, that sense that love and truth and justice were real forces in the world, forces that could overcome even the deepest darkness. That night, Sarah returned to her home on Maple Street, the house that had been violated but was still hers, the neighborhood that had seen her trauma, but had also surrounded her with support, the space that would never feel exactly the same, but could still be home. She made herself dinner, something simple and comforting. She sat at her kitchen table, eating slowly, appreciating the quiet and the safety she was rebuilding one day at a time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Officer Riley. "Saw your speech at the rally today. It was powerful. Thank you for continuing to push all of us to be better." Sarah smiled slightly and typed back, "Thank you for actually doing the work. Actions matter more than words." Another text came in, this one from Michelle. "So proud of you, sis. You're changing the world." Sarah's response was simple, "We're changing the world, together." She finished her dinner and went to her bedroom, the same bedroom where everything had happened 6 months ago. She'd redecorated slightly,
new curtains, new bedding, trying to make the space feel different, safer. But she'd also kept some things the same, refusing to let that night completely define her space. As she got ready for bed, Sarah found herself thinking about the stranger again. She thought about his words, about his compassion, about the way he'd seen into everyone's hearts and called them to something better. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, didn't know if she was supposed to, but she carried his message with her every day. The message that every person has worth, that truth matters, that love is stronger than hate, that change is possible when people are willing to do the hard work. Sarah climbed into bed, the same bed where she'd been sleeping when her world exploded. She turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to her house settle around her. The sounds were familiar now, comforting again, though it had taken months to get to this place. Just before sleep claimed her, Sarah whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, whoever you were, wherever you are, thank you." And in that moment, Sarah could have sworn she felt a gentle presence, like a hand on her shoulder, like a whisper of peace. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything specific, but she felt it as surely as she felt her own heartbeat. "You are seen. You are valued. You are loved." The words the stranger had spoken to her that terrible night, words she was learning to believe again, words that were healing her one day at a time. Sarah smiled in the darkness and let sleep come. Tomorrow she would wake up and continue the work, continue healing, continue fighting, continue building the world she wanted to live in. A world where every person's dignity was protected, where justice was real, where love conquered fear. But tonight she rested. Tonight she felt peace. Tonight she was home. And somewhere in the city, 3 former officers were also lying in their beds, thinking about the stranger who had changed their lives, thinking about the work they still had to do, thinking about the journey of transformation they were on. Riley lay awake, thinking about the community members he'd met that week, really met, seeing them as full human beings for the first time. He thought about the assumptions he'd carried for so long, and the work of unlearning them. It was hard work, uncomfortable work, but necessary work. Patterson sat in his living room, reading testimonies from people who'd been harmed by police violence. Each story broke his heart a little more, opened his eyes a little wider. He was making a list of organizations to support, ways to use his pension and his time to make amends for the harm he'd caused over 23 years. Chen was drafting a proposal for the police department, a comprehensive plan for reform based on everything he'd learned from community organizations. He knew it would face resistance. He knew he might face retaliation, but he thought about the stranger's words about courage versus comfort, and he knew he had to try. 3 men who had violated a woman's home and rights 6 months ago. 3 men who were now genuinely trying to be better, to do better, to build better. It wasn't enough. It would never fully undo the harm they'd caused, but it was something. It was a start. It was proof that transformation was possible, and in homes across the city, across the country, people who had heard Sarah's story were thinking about their own biases, their own assumptions, their own need to change. Some were dismissing it, refusing to examine themselves, but others were listening, really listening, letting the story challenge them. The work of justice was slow, the work of transformation was difficult, but it was happening. Person by person, heart by heart, choice by choice. The sun would rise again in a few hours over Riverside Heights. It would illuminate Sarah's home with its strong new door. It would shine on a neighborhood that had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths. It would light up a city where people were organizing, demanding, building something better. And in that light, in that new day, the work would continue. The work of healing, the work of justice, the work of seeing every person's full humanity. The work of building a world where doors weren't broken down because of assumptions, where dignity was protected, where love triumphed over fear. It was the work the stranger had called them to, the work he had shown was possible, the work that transformed individual hearts and entire systems. And though they couldn't see him, though they didn't know if they'd ever encounter him again, his presence was still with them. In every choice to choose compassion over judgment, in every moment of speaking truth to power, in every act of real transformation, the stranger had come in a moment of crisis and shown them what was possible. Now it was up to them to make that possibility real, to live it, to build it, to be it. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. The work of redemption, the work of justice, the work of love. And in the quiet of the night, if anyone had been listening carefully, they might have heard something like a whisper on the wind. Words spoken 2,000 years ago, and still true today. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. The stranger's message, the timeless message, the message that could heal a broken world if people would only hear it and live it. Sarah slept peacefully in her home. 3 former officers lay awake, thinking about who they wanted to be. A community continued its work for justice, and somewhere in a way that transcended physical presence, the stranger smiled, because love was winning, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and struggles, but winning nonetheless. Truth was emerging. Justice was being demanded. Hearts were changing, and that was exactly why he had come. The end. This story hits different, doesn't it? Sarah Johnson did everything right. 18 years of saving lives, owning her home, being the kind of neighbor everyone claims they want, and yet at 2:47 a.m., none of that mattered, because 3 officers saw her skin color before they saw her humanity. But here's what makes this story powerful. It's not just about the injustice, it's about what happened next. That mysterious stranger who appeared in Sarah's doorway didn't just comfort her. He held up a mirror to everyone in that room and forced them to see the truth they'd been avoiding. Officer Riley had to face how his sister's trauma had turned into prejudice against innocent people. Patterson had to confront 23 years of unchecked assumptions. Chen had to admit his silence made him complicit. And Sarah had to decide whether trauma would define her or fuel her fight for justice. The transformation that followed wasn't instant or easy. Riley didn't just apologize and move on. He requested community policing, attended bias training, spoke at city council meetings. Patterson retired to do the internal work he'd avoided for decades. Chen used his position to advocate for real reform from inside the system. And Sarah, she became a voice for everyone who's ever been judged by their appearance, rather than their character. She turned her violation into advocacy, her pain into power, her trauma into testimony. Was that stranger really Jesus? The story leaves it open, but the impact was undeniable. He knew their deepest secrets. He spoke about being wrongly condemned himself. He taught them that justice isn't just punishment, it's transformation. He reminded them that love is stronger than hate, truth is stronger than lies, and change is possible when people do the hard work. This isn't just a story about one wrong address raid. It's about every time assumptions become actions, every time fear becomes prejudice, every time good people do bad things because they haven't examined their own hearts. But it's also about hope. Hope that people can change. Hope that speaking truth leads to accountability. Hope that one moment of genuine transformation can ripple outward and change entire systems. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge us to be better, to see each other's full humanity, to choose love over fear. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before someone knew who you really were? How did it make you feel? And what do you think it takes for real change to happen? Not just apologies, but actual transformation. Drop your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe encounters like Sarah's stranger still happen today, type a believe in the comments. Remember, we're not just watching stories here. We're building a community of people who believe love conquers hate, truth defeats lies, and every person deserves dignity. See you in the next story. Stay blessed, stay hopeful, stay fighting for justice.